Uh, Good afternoon, everyone, uh, and thank you so much for being part of our conversation this afternoon on this Wasomi book conversation that you are having, which is titled Whither Developmental SADC. Now, my name is Siphumelele Duma. I'm a postdoctoral research fellow with the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation at the University of Johannesburg. So we are having this conversation this afternoon, which is titled Whither Developmental SADC. It is named, or it is centered around the book that I published last year under the UJ Press, which is titled Developmental Integration and Industrialization in Southern Africa. And I'm very happy to be having this conversation, or having this Wasomi book club conversation this afternoon alongside one of our very great scholars, Dr. Alexander Rosero. So we are saying Whither Developmental SADC, in the sense that so in the aftermath of the transformation of the Southern African Development Community as one of the RECs, or one of the regional economic communities, that is for grounding, or that is one of the building blocks for the African Union, or for the establishment of the African Economic Community. We are saying that this is one of these institutions that were tasked, or that were given the mandate to then go into their own region, with this case being the sub-region of the Southern African part of the continent. So the first part, oh, sorry, I need to raise my voice. I'm told I'm a bit low. So we are saying developmental integration is an approach to regional integration that was adopted by the Southern African Development Community as one of the regional economic communities that was founded by the African Union when it encouraged the sub-regions of the continent to establish the regional economic communities across the regions. What were these regions going to be doing? The main idea behind these sub-regions were to assist with the establishment of the African Economic Community. Now, this is one of the challenges that had been very central in the aftermath of the attainment of the political independence in the African continent. So now, with the founding of the Abuja Treaty, the member states were tasked to then go back into their sub-regions to then establish or strengthen the regional economic communities. So they were asked for their strengthening where they did not exist, or rather the founding where they did not exist, and their strengthening where they already existed. But now in Southern Africa, it was that region where we already had a regional community, or a regional organization in the form of SADC. At the time, it was SADCC with a double C. But now the difference with this one was that at that stage, it was an organization that was very much political oriented. Jews, the regions are dependent on the apartheid South Africa. So member states came together, frontline states, 9 member states came together to say that we need to find a way to establish our own economic muscles across the region, and help the reading of the colonial yoke of different members. Developmental regional integration, as you are saying, it is an approach to regional integration. Why are we saying it is desirable in Southern Africa? Or why are we saying that it is this much desirable in the African continent in general? Or why is it desirable across developing regions in the world? So at this point, it has become much of a cliche to say a lot of developing regions across the world were obviously colonized by the former colonialists and the European superpowers for centuries. What had that caused? It has put them in a situation where there's very lower industrial base. When the decolonization wave took off during the mid 20th century in the African continent, a lot of these countries found that they did not have a very much stronger manufacturing base. And then the Southern Africa was not an exception in that, which is why they then opted to adopt an approach to regional integration that is saying we are going to try to have the state playing a very central role in the development of the member states in the region. So developmental integration, it is a form of development that we can say in a way has a developmental state at its core. The difference here is that this is happening at the regional level. Now, in the context of SADC, member states were saying, we are going to ensure that the state is very central in the development prospects of the region. We are going to ensure that each member state, we come together, we pull our resources, and then we assist each other in terms of trying to get, our industrial base, propped up, being in a proper state that it can be able to be competitive enough compared to other counterparts in the international global economy. Now, obviously, this is an approach that has faced a lot of backlash. One may recall that in the early 90s, with the global ascendancy of the neoliberal economic and political order following the fall of the Berlin Wall, there were a lot of, policy initiatives that spread around the world, which led into a situation where member states, in a way, across the world, were found themselves having what we may call, as noted by one of the most foremost development scholars called Cheng in the early 2000s, who published a book that was called Kicking Away the Ladder. What did it mean in that context? He was saying that while it has been found out that a lot of countries in Europe and North America, or even in the Great Britain, it has been found that the state was actually very important, was very central in driving the industrial base and the manufacturing bases of these countries in their development. However, when they developed and then managed to industrialize, and then now that when the catch-up game is gaining momentum in the developing world, now the roles are changing in a way. Now they are saying that the state is not supposed to play a substantial role in the development of a state. The state is supposed to leave the markets to function by themselves, lest demand and supply, for example, take over the market and operate on their own. They are saying that the state is slowing down the functioning of the market. So while that argument has been brought up very numerously, it is one of the main reasons then that a lot of countries have been struggling to develop in the developing world. And that's one of the arguments that I'm putting forward in the book that we are discussing this afternoon. That one of the main challenges that they have faced is that while a lot of countries in the Southern African development community in particular, was that while they were trying maybe to secure developmental loans or any other assistance from our so-called international donors or international financial institutions and all of that, what will these kinds of assistance come with will be these conditionalities that are attached to these donations or loans, if they come in the form of loans. Are these conditionalities that is to say you need to privatize, you need to liberalize the market as a developing economy. Now, we've seen that it has become a very, very, very major challenge in Southern Africa to have a lot of economies just liberalizing without a substantial industrialization. I'm saying this while SADC recognized in their adoption of developmental integration in the early 1990s. They were saying they were doing this because they are realizing that member states have a very lower manufacturing base. A lot of countries in the region have a lot of people living below the poverty line. They were saying that the infrastructure in the region is very, very dilapidated. Now, adopting developmental regional integration was then to say, we are going to come together as a regional economic community and then assist each other in a way. Back in our national capitals, we have the member states and we have the government of the day driving the economic agenda. We have the governments driving or assisting or giving all the necessary wherewithal to the private sector to then assist in championing the country's development agenda. This is a direct opposite towards the neoliberal economic agenda I was suggesting at the time, which was to say the state is supposed to stay out, and then you are letting the private sector, we are letting the market forces, by the market forces, I mean the demand and supply, they are letting those just take their own effect in the economy and just stay out of it. So, which is now to say, it was very unsettling in a way with that realization, with what I've just explained, with SADC, all of those reasons for them to adopt developmental regional integration, with the recognition that member states do not have a proper manufacturing base and industrial base. That obviously is coming from the realization that member states do not have much to trade with each other because they have economies that for centuries had relied on just the extraction and the exportation. That was the starting point of a lot of SADC economies, of a lot of Southern African economies when they gained independence. A lot of them, and this is still the case with a lot of them even to date, there's too much heavy reliance on the extraction of primary commodities for their exportation outside the continent. That is called their trading with the third parties. Now, that means they do not have that much to trade with each other amongst themselves. So they had realized that beginning with the market integration approach, that is just to saying, let's just liberalize trade, let's just open our borders and just start trading with each other. They understood that it will be defeating the purpose of their development agenda. I'm saying that it was very unsettling because nearly just about 5 years after that, after adopting developmental regional integration, with all of those realizations, the SADC is then signing the trade protocol. Now, this trade protocol was like a blueprint in a way of a free trade area that was supposed to come into effect in 2008. Now, this was it actually ended up being signed, ratified only like 6 years later, I believe in the early 2000s, because a lot of member states were a bit hesitant to signing it because they were saying that, so they were afraid that a bigger economy, for example, like South Africa, will be bulldozing a lot of them in terms of, they have these bigger companies that may end up dumping goods across the regions at the expense of their own local infant industries. So despite all of those concerns, the trade protocol ends up getting into effect in the SADC region. And then it gains necessary ratifications. And then by 2008, the member states are involved in a free trade area in the SADC region. But despite the existence of that free trade area, if you look at the intra-SADC trade, it is still not very much, it has not very much improved during that period. Why is that the case? It's just what we've just explained now, that a member state was struggling with this manufacturing capacity, industrial base, and all of that. A lot of them are very much reliant on the production and exploitation of primary commodities. Now, member states, after the free trade era, they were expected that by 2010, they will be, they will be in a customs union. And then I believe by 2015, it was supposed to be a common market, 2016, a monetary union. And then by 2018, they were supposed to have a single currency. Across all of those targets, they have only met one, which was the free trade era in 2008. Now, in 2024, the region was supposed to be was supposed to be operating in a single currency since 2018. That has not been the case. And then we are saying here, that's deflection from the central agenda of developmental integration approach, of focusing on having a developmental stance or a developmental approach to regional integration in the region. That's the focus that they took in the late 90s, is the one in a way that ended up being responsible for a lot of detracting that has happened in the process following that. So now we are saying that how has the region's quest for industrialization and sustainable development fared over the 30 years of its existence? So SADC was turning 30. The current version of SADC was turning 30 in 2022. That's what 2022. It was turning 30. Which was to say, how has I just thought it would be very, it was timely to reflect upon this developmental integration agenda at that particular point in time, which was 2022, whereas I was transforming my thesis into a book. How has it fared? How have member states developed since? Has the industrialization improved in the region? Has the manufacturing capacity of member states improved in any way? So in doing this, my primary focus was on, I was looking at the structural composition of the economies of SADC, as opposed to just looking at the economic growth at its entirety, because not all forms of growth are very much that good. So the focus was very much on how, okay, fine, economies may be growing, but what kind of growth is taking place? Is there any structural transformation that is happening? Because some of you may recall that in the early 2000s, for example, a lot of economies in SADC, they experienced a lot of growth. That was between 2000 and 2003, around that period, and then between 2009 to 2012. And those are the years of commodity boom, which was to say raw materials, they had a very growing demand for these commodities. I remember in the early 2000s, it was China and India. The market was very higher for the kind of industrialization or growth or development that China was taking place at the time. So now they were not any more necessarily relying on European demand, Southern African countries for the demand for their primary commodities, but in a way it was diversifying towards East Asia. But now that is to say that is a form of growth that is not sustainable, because from the very get-go, we are saying that you're trying to get a different approach to your regional integration, because you're trying to diversify your own economy. You're trying to diversify away from the reliance on primary commodities, and then maybe venturing into the manufacturing industry, and then all the way up to the services sector. So we are saying that it has been so we are saying that kind of growth in the early 2000s was unsustainable, because shortly after that demand dropped, which was seen as then while China was taking a different kind of development path. We are saying that all of a sudden the economies then they collapsed. All of a sudden the growth for a lot of member states then started to dwindle. So you look, for example, at countries like Botswana. It's one of the cases that I used in the book. Then we are saying, while they did in a way, they've really grown. They are consistently and very consistently cited in the literature as a miracle case in the African continent. Well, that may well be the case, that they are really growing, and it's a very in a way developing country. But what kind of growth is taking place? Is it the growth that the SADC developmental integration approach had envisioned? Is it not the kind of growth that they were coming together for from the very get-go? Let us develop together towards this sustainable, forms of development. This is very important, because in the history of global economies, there's not even a single one country that has been able to uplift its citizens out of poverty without industrialization. So industrialization has been very important in propelling sustainable growth for economies across the world. Then we are saying, if SADC economies continues to have this amount of reliance on forms of growth that are still very much channeled towards the primary sector, is is very foremost objective, which is to uplift the standard of living of the citizens across the region and then alleviate poverty. That is not happening without sustainable growth, and that is not happening without sustainable industrialization, where you find a lot of, there's jobs and, and there's enough, there's the economy is doing, it is diversified enough to then can be able to gather for the local needs. So those are just some of the major challenges that have come up in the region's quest for poverty alleviation agenda. That you are saying the region is supposed to assist the member state. It's a different case. Member states' political will to implement the resolutions at the regional level. Now that becomes a different case, which has been consistently argued as one of the main reasons that is behind the failure of a regional integration agenda in the Southern African development community, which is to say, maybe a different approach in a way needs to be adopted when communicating these kinds of challenges. I mean, or communicating these kinds of because it is not very helpful to always consistently be citing the lack of political will and all of that. Maybe the way this should be sold to member states, it's very important to say, for example, if you are driving a developmental integration or regional integration agenda, then you're saying, okay, we are proposing that we are doing this. And then you become very clear in a way, well, this is good for South Africa because of A, B, C, D, and E. This is good for Botswana because of A, B, C, D, and E. And this is good for Zimbabwe because of A, B, C, D, and E. So that is maybe in a way can be one of the correct approaches that member states they can then try to use, because I believe now it's a cliche and it is an exhausted argument to go on about how much of a political will the region lacks. But until member states in the Southern Africa very much deliberate around domesticating this developmental integration agenda, because it is in a way across the region in Southern Africa, a lot of governments are actually at the center, or in a way, they are in a position to be driving the economic or the economic growth agenda or the economic development agenda across the region. But in a way, all of these very good on paper plans and initiatives that are happening at the regional level, they, in a way, they do not end up showing up, or they do not end up getting domesticated when they go back to their national capitals. They are not always very implemented by member states, so that they can then see the results of regional integration as they came together to help each other, or to assist each other, or to then promote regional growth and development in the region. So what is coming out here, we are saying then that despite the adoption of all of these initiatives, like there's been a lot of initiatives that are adopted to promote industrialization. These include, we count the industrial upgrading and modernization framework. I believe that was, they adopted that one in 2009 with the assistance of UNIDO, the United Nations Industrial Development Organization. They were supposed to domesticate that member states. And then in 2012, there was an adoption of the Industrial Development Framework. And then in 2015, there was the adoption of the industrial strategy, the industrialization strategy, and the roadmap. All of these initiatives that have been adopted by SADC as a region, they have one thing in common. All of them are underscoring the significance of having a proper manufacturing base, of industrializing, if all countries in the region will have any prospect of inspiring sustained and sustainable growth, and then as a result have sustainable development, which will then consequently alleviate poverty. All of these initiatives, they do recognize that not even a single country across the world has been able to develop, or in a way sustain its economy employed citizens, raise wages. All they recognize that it has not happened without the transformation of an economy from the one that is focused on primary production to the manufacturing one. And then you may venture into the services sector once you have a proper industrial base like that. And I want to highlight that because Mauritius, for instance, is one of the cases in the Southern African region where they jumped from the primary commodities to the services industry. But if you look at the manufacturing base and the manufacturing sector, it has not been very strong. They have an economy that is very much, propelled, or that is very much reliant on the services sector, but the manufacturing base, the manufacturing industry is not that much very strong. So the country is still vulnerable to, kinds of shocks and all of that. So we are saying these economies are not sustained because the vulnerability and your integration into the global economy, that's what determines the vulnerability in what kind of growth do you specialize in. So you're specializing in primary production. You have, commodities, maybe can be crude oil, and we're relying on diamond. What happens if the international demand for that falls? Or what happens if the prices falls? We've seen these crashes happening in the continent. This is not theoretical at this point. It has happened. We saw it in the 1970s when African countries were growing, for example, and then 1970s, that commodity crash, which harmed a lot of economies in the continent. By now that one will think that a lot of these economies will have learned from that and really be very much enthusiastic in a way in driving a kind of an agenda that will help them attain some sustainable forms of growth. But it has been very much, the process has been dragging. And in some metrics, if you compare the manufacturing base in a lot of African countries between the 1980s and how it is now, or even in SADC, you find that the manufacturing base was much more stronger in the 1980s and 90s than it is actually now, which means there's deindustrialization that is happening, which is a direct opposite of what they are trying to achieve, of where they are trying to be, despite of all of these efforts that they are saying they are putting in, which obviously means that something is going wrong. There's something that is not, adding up or happening in relation to the developmental integration agenda of the Southern African region in particular, but the African continent in general. So, and then I'm saying as one of the arguments that I'm pushing forward in my book is that it is not possible, given the state of given the material conditions in Southern Africa, it is not possible to do what a lot of mainstream neoliberal theorists have been saying, that it is the state that is tripping the developmental prospects of regions like Southern Africa. They are saying they are the ones that are slowing down at the developmental process because there are some theories or approaches that are very much biased against the primary sector. So it will say the state should be very vital moving forward in driving a sustainable forms of growth in the Southern African region. So it will be very difficult for this current state to improve unless the state takes this role in a much more very serious manner and try to drive the industrialization and the economic development of these member states more forward across the region. Or maybe before I introduce my fellow panelist, Dr. Alexander Rosero, to then come and give us some of his reviews on the book, I would like to go back just a bit to the point that I opened with in terms of the arguments between the states playing a very central role, with Southern Africa having formally recognized and adopted developmental regional integration. But then on the other hand, while they have this trade protocol, which are two forms of regional integration, because you have we have a developmental regional integration, and then that one, of course, is the one that is saying we have the states playing a very substantial role in the economy, assisting, pushing or driving the integration agenda. And then you have the more neoliberal one, which has the market integration at its center. By market integration is just to come together from the get-go. We are following this linear approach to regional integration, which begins with the free trade area, free trade agreement, and then you have the customs union, and then you have the common market, we have the monetary union, and then you have the single currency. That form of regional integration is not, it will be very difficult for that one to actually transpire and work in a region like Southern Africa. And that is why the region has been stuck, tried to implement it, and this has been stuck on the free trade area since 2008. And then even that free trade area itself is not that very much well implemented. Why is that the case? Because you have member states that are still imposing tariffs on another. They are still adopting some protectionist measures against the very fellow members of the region. Why is that the case? It's because a lot of countries in the region are still trying to protect their own infant industries against each other. So they will not have to find themselves in that kind of a situation had there been no confusion about that. Hey, we are doing developmental regional integration here. We are not intertwining these methods that in a way will end up clashing at some point and not working out very well, which is what ended up happening. I remember, I believe it was sometime in the early 2010s when it was Zimbabwe, I believe, that had some very harsh protectionist measures against South Africa. That was a clear violation of not only of the trade protocol, but of the free trade agreement that was already in place among the SADC member states. So there's just a lot of issues that we can still pick on, but I believe that some of them will come back to them during the questions and answer session. So at this point, I'd like then now to introduce my respondent, one of our respondents, which is Dr. Alexander Rusero, who is a visiting Letsema Fellow at the Institute for Pan-African Thought and Conversation. He holds a PhD in International Relations from the University of Pretoria, and he is also a senior lecturer of International Relations, Politics, and Journalism with 15 years of university teaching experience, having taught at Harare School of Journalism and Media Studies, Africa University's College of Social Sciences, Theology, Humanities, and Education, and Great Zimbabwe University's Department of Politics and Public Management. Dr. Rusero is an author of 10 academic textbooks and more than 30 peer-reviewed book chapters and journal papers related to media, democracy, human rights, international relations, and foreign policy, media, libraries, and archives, as well as Pan-Africanism and decoloniality. It is my honor, ladies and gentlemen, to welcome Dr. Alexander Rusero to share some of his thoughts with us at the stage. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Brother Duma, for the presentation as well as the warm introduction. I see several colleagues in the call who are not strangers. So IPATC is always home, and whenever I am called to duty, it's some kind of a homecoming of some sort. So I will make my response to the lamentation that you have raised towards the end of your presentation when you made reference to deindustrialization. That does not tally with the pace to say we are worse off now as a region in as much as industrialization is concerned. This is no coincidence, because we are saying we are more decolonized now politically than we were in the 1990s. So I will use a decolonial analytical lens to argue that the African state in general and the Southern African region in particular is pretty much still a colonial region. And if we are a colonial region, there is no way we can have an autonomous regional developmental and regional industrialization agenda, which does not seem or seek to benefit those who are erstwhile colonizers, but in truth, who have remained colonizers as we are having this webinar right now. Hence the argument that the Southern African Development Community is reeling under what I call the colonial matrices of power, as well as some total imperial insanity. So this has kind of derailed the much aspired industrialization integration agenda. And for most of the time, we might not want to sound very pessimistic, but we may not witness this agenda in our lifetime, precisely because we are rightly where we are placed by the erstwhile colonizers. We have remained the colonizers with regards to our economies still confined in the hunting and gathering mode. So regional developmental integration, regional developmental industrialization cannot take place when we are still in the hunting and gathering mode that we are aware we were even during the pre-colonial era. So with the development in SADC should not escape the lenses of saying, is SADC really autonomous to chart the way forward for its own benefits? Or there is this invisible hierarchical pyramid which places SADC at the lowest ebb of the global, regional, continental, as well as even at state level with regards to issues of development and issues of industrialization. So if you read Duma's book, it starts with a helicopter scan of tracing where we came from as a region and where we are, including even tracing the developmental agenda indexes from 1992 with the evolution of SADC with a double C, with SADC, the current we have following the decolonization process of South Africa. So the whole idea is that the model of our regional integration and our industrialization, it is confined within the premises of a world system where SADC is supposed to fit in that world system, courtesy of the African Union that then designated issues of industrialization and integration at regional economic level. So the RECs, of which SADC is one, have a mandate to ensure integration and industrialization. But the problematic aspect with this approach of the world system is that as for ourselves, our regional economic community has remained stuck in the political than economic developmental trajectory. So SADC seems to be very, very strong when it comes to issues with regards to the politics of the day, issues with regards to them maybe guarding jealously against imperial machinations that may lead to the torpedo of incumbent regimes in power, precisely those hailing from the liberation movement. SADC is very clear when it comes to that. But with regards to regional integration and industrialization, what we are seeing is actually what I characterize as the regional integration versus the disintegration of states. So states in the SADC region are today more disintegrated than they were say 30 years ago when there was consummation of this regional economic community, precisely because of issues to do with liberation politics, issues to do with skepticism, and even issues to do with the discourses of regime change, which take precedence ahead of everything else. So if I make reference, for example, to the European Union South Africa Trade Development Cooperation Agreement, where South Africa entered into an agreement with the 28 member states of the EU as South Africa and not of SADC, you will realize that the aspects of integration, which then should be the key drivers, anchors of regional industrialization, we are still pretty much far from that, because the EU in its sense realizes that there is a practical need to enter into an agreement as 28 member states of the EU then, because this is something that happened prior to Brexit. But with regards to South Africa, it does not see the agency and the urgency of entering into such an agreement with SADC as a bloc. So it becomes very problematic to say we are charting forward with issues of integration, because what we are seeing is integration is discourse, integration is rhetoric, but in practice, states of today, they are more disintegrated than they were, as alluded to by Dr. Duma, say 30 years ago. So I will briefly move to the aspects of the colonial matrices of power, which are likely to jeopardize whatever aspirations that we have in as much as issues of regional integration, issues of regional industrialization of SADC are concerned. Because we are grappling in colonial matrices of power where the African state in general and all states in SADC in particular, they are pretty much still colonial states. So if we are still colonial states, we have to dance to the whims and caprices of our colonizers, and to then, outside that sphere of influence, try to come out with a progressive developmental integration and industrialization agenda without the involvement or the designs, imperial designs. It becomes very, very problematic. As has been indicated recently by the case of South Africa that dragged Israel before the ICJ, and Israel actually lost dismally. And how did the global imperial machinations react? They did not take that lightly. Hence, you have a whole bill crafted by the United States, which seeks to revise its attitude, its interactions, its dealings, diplomatic dealings with South Africa. What that tells you is that South Africa is then going to be used as a global whip, as a whip by the global north to whip African states to say, if you go this way, you will end up like South Africa. So it's unfortunate, but that's where we are, where the rules-based order is still designed in such a way that certain states behave like global sheriff who decides what is good and what is wrong, which has no place altogether in international law. So this is not only unique to South Africa. Zimbabwe has been reeling under sanctions since 2001 that were promulgated on 21 December, the so-called Zimbabwe Democracy and Economic Recovery Act, ZIDERA. So all these, you cannot have Zimbabwe as a critical player in the region when it is reeling under sanctions. So when SADC goes on the world platform and say, lift Zimbabwe's sanctions, it's more than just issues of regime preservation of ZANU-PF or issues of some biases and soft spots on a fellow liberation sister movement in form of ZANU-PF. But you cannot have a complete regional integration agenda in a scheme of things where certain states are reeling under sanctions, certain states are being punished, certain states are at war, as has been the case with the eastern region of the Democratic Republic of Congo. So these are the colonial matrices of power that we should not escape when we are looking at the feasibility of regional integration and industrialization in the SADC region, hence with the developmental integration in SADC. So you also look at the Russo-Ukraine war and how it has also reconfigured how SADC as a region diplomatically interacts with the West, diplomatically interacts with the global North, because the expectation, the major expectation is that SADC, courtesy of it still being a colonial region, should naturally put its faith, put its support to its colonial masters. So SADC is a disappointing region when it comes to issues of the Russo-Ukraine war, because for most of the time, SADC states have either decided to be neutral or shown certain subtle tendencies of being pro-Russian. So if you look at it closely, the very same things that America and the rest of the global North is accusing Putin of Russia in Ukraine are the very same plight of the Palestinians suffering under the genocidal and imperial orgies of Israel, and America is quiet. So that kind of selective approach becomes very, very problematic when we cascade it to agendas that denote to issues of regional integration and issues of industrialization. So our developmental trajectory, ladies and gentlemen, they are reeling under colonial matrices of power, which, as Duma rightly points out, daily contribute to the deindustrialization of SADC, where SADC is worse off today than it were 30 years ago. But we also have to be very, very inward looking in our approach, because the global North is very clear, but we are not very clear as states in Africa what we want for ourselves. For example, the whole regional integration and industrialization complex is very silent on the role of the citizen. So we have not yet reached the SADC-ness or SADC-nization, because the circuit of integration and industrialization is still confined within states. So citizens have no place and no role in SADC, because SADC citizens, in principle, they exist, but in practice, they do not exist. That's why we still consider each other as foreigners whenever we cross or encroach those colonially imposed artificial borders amongst ourselves, because the citizen is still pretty much on the periphery of the affairs of the state with regards to integration, with regards to industrialization, just like the black majority it. So we just in the other. So if the citizen who is supposed to derive the much needed dividends of integration and industrialization is not part of the mix of things, there is no continuity there. One government comes, it has got a certain orientation against another government in another country. So there is no harmonious continuity of policies with regards to what takes place in SADC. So in terms of our manufacturing sector, which was the key area or unit of analysis by Brother Duma, our manufacturing sector has not shifted an inch from the imperial designs. So when SADC was still under the jaws of physical occupation and imperialism, it was a manufacturing hub and could not do anything outside manufacturing. But that kind of manufacturing was minimalist because it was at extractive level that was predatory and very plunderous in nature. So if you are South Africa, you are a manufacturing hub of sugar, and the whole of South Africa was a sugarcane plant. So if you are Zimbabwe, you are a hub of extracting ore and gold. And the whole of Zimbabwe at some time was reduced into that kind of activities. But that kind of colonial approach, which was an imperial design, was very predatory, was very extractive. And we have not moved an inch. That's why Zimbabwe, South Africa, Zambia, Mozambique, Botswana, they bought aeroplanes to go to Russia, to go to Ukraine to say, please stop fighting. We are dying of hunger. Yet we have vast spaces of land, which if we can effectively utilize, can actually end all our problems with regards to starvation, with regards to food security and food supply. It's all because of the template that we have inherited. So we might have the good economic policies, industrialization policies, which are clearly spelled out, well articulated by Duma in his book. But at the background of all this is that we are still reeling under colonial matrices of power because we inherited the colonial state which has not been decolonized up to this day. So if the purpose of colonial states were to serve and service the developmental and industrialization agenda of Europe and America, it has remained like that up to now because we are still colonial states. But in addition to that, developmental integration and industrialization in Southern Africa also has got several hindrances, which are not by design or our own making. You look at the current scenario where SADC region is still a dumping ground, where there is a menace in terms of dumping Japanese automobile vehicles, etc., a lot of things. So our industrial agenda is not predicated on issues of manufacturing our own tools, manufacturing our own equipment, utilizing that equipment. So we are still a dumping ground. There is still an uneven flow with regards to trade, which practically becomes a hindrance in as much as the fruition of industrialization and integration envisaged by Duma in his book is concerned. And in addition to that, we are also choking under the ravages of climate change. Climate change has ravaged Southern Africa, perhaps ahead of several regions in the world, to the extent that drought is looming, starvation is looming. Now, without food, there is no developmental trajectory that takes place at whatever level, be it family, societal, country level, continental, regional, etc. Because the source of livelihood is food. And when you are secure in terms of food, that's when you can be innovative in terms of industrialization, in terms of integration. So we are choking under these ravages of climate change, and we seem not to have a plan as a region. We seem not to have a plan. We also seem not to establish an intricate relationship between the ravages of climate change and the hindrances that climate change trigger in terms of developmental integration and industrialization. So climate change is also manifested in various problems that are vexing us. So the power shortages, power outages, power crisis is not only hitting South Africa, it is hitting everyone, hitting Zimbabwe, hitting Zambia, hitting Mozambique. So without power, there is no way we can also drive integration or industrialization agenda. This is in addition to issues of migration, because industrialization and integration require skills, require competencies, require literacies. Without skills, there is no country that can develop. But unfortunately, SADC is amongst the top countries that is undergoing a crisis of brain drain. For most of the time, economies in SADC are not rewarding and permissive enough, to the extent that we are just a training ground. We develop someone into a skilled person, and that person boards an aeroplane, is in Europe, is in New Zealand, is in Australia. So there is no way we can develop, we can industrialize when we are daily hemorrhaging with regards to our skills. So that kind of skills deficit, the skills gap, and the skills loss that SADC region continuously experience is a greatest anachronism with regards to regional integration and regional industrialization, clearly articulated in Siphumelele Duma's book. So we are also witnessing the rise of authoritarian tendencies. So the nature of industrialization and integration, which Duma outlines, somehow is in sync with a neoliberal approach that is supposed to be anchored on the notions of democracy. So there is a problem. We have states in SADC region that are increasingly becoming very authoritarian. Some of them are even degenerating into neo-patrimonial states, where states are reduced into an extension of private property by the political leadership. So the current crop of political leadership has also done a disservice with regards to integration and industrialization, because they do not have the agency to drive this for the benefit of their states, for the benefit of their regions, but rather they look for immediate dividends that are likely to come at a personal and not a state or government level. So this is where we are, and we must say these uncomfortable truths to then build the case to say, why are we not industrializing? Why are we deindustrializing 30 or so years after the formation of SADC? So if you read Duma's book, which consists of 9 chapters, brilliantly outlined chapters and amounting to about 200 pages, which is very friendly to read, you will end the book on a terrible pessimistic note, because of the fact that we are de-industrialized now, and our integration is crumbling now than they were, say, 30 years ago. I will stop here for now and allow for discussion and further conversations. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosero, for that very much, robust and thought-provoking contribution. And I think at this stage, I will open the floor to the questions. So now we're entering the questions and answer session. So you can just use the raise hand function, or you can just write down your question or comment on the chat, and then we will read it out. Just by the raise hand function, and then promote you so that you'll be able to speak. You can also make use of the chat, and then we will read the questions there if you would rather have it that way. But perhaps while maybe the attendees are still, thinking, Dr. Rosero, I just want to, quickly look at the International Division of Labor that we are seeing now. I see there is a hand, Dr. Vanyoro. Maybe let me put that on hold for now and just give one of the attendants a chance to speak. Yes, Kudzai?
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Duma, and thank you, Dr. Hero, for your great reflections. I think this is a very important input, and also there's so much to talk about. I just wanted to maybe find out from, I mean, based on someone who obviously hasn't yet read the book, so basically stemming from a point of somewhat ignorance, but also to speak to what Dr. Lucero has spoken about. I mean, is there, in this work and in these reflections that the both of you have given, is there any potential value in acknowledging the changes that have come about with globalization and the quick rate at which the ideas of space and time have become, to some extent, compressed and disrupted? I say this because I also feel like there is potential there to move towards a more sort of optimistic interaction or understanding of these movements, particularly the intercontinental movements, which will obviously feed well into narratives of this idea of a brain drain, that it is the global north that stands to benefit from the places, from the energies and talents from SADC. So yeah, briefly then, would there be any value in looking at it from that particular angle? And also, just to say that, I mean, there's also a lot of ongoing migration narratives that are pessimistic about the movement from the south to the north. But would this maybe help us to think about sort of the emerging diaspora communities and how they also feed back into or continue relationships with the continent once, or with the region once they've left? That's my question. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Dr. Vanyoro. Let me see if we have another question here in the chats. I have attended many of these public discussions by Dr. Lucero and like-minded academics and analysts. Responsibility always, I'm trying to figure out if there's a question there. How can citizens take a proactive approach to integrate themselves in regional development and integration, if possible? How can citizens, I believe you can also say this, Dr. Lucero, I believe it's directed to you, this one. How can citizens take a proactive approach to integrate themselves in regional development and integration, if possible? So with the absence of any other question at this point, I think I'll just quickly attend to the one that has just been raised by Dr. Vanyoro right now. I believe that at some point during my discussion, I spoke about, I'm trying to answer your question in relation to the material conditions of Southern Africa at the moment. So I was saying, but I did not use the globalization as a concept. But now in this context, I'm saying the advantages that may come with globalization depends on what your material conditions are at a given particular point in time. Why I'm saying this, because globalization, for example, in the case of Southern Africa and what we're speaking about right now, it relates to, maybe you can say, we are liberalizing your trade. And I've already explored on that, on why at this point, the exposition of a lot of SADC economies to this international competition is not very much a desirable thing at the moment. That's one of the main things that comes with the globalizations within the context of what we're discussing right now. It is undesirable because a lot of economies in Southern Africa, for instance, we are just speaking about how the region is deindustrializing, while it is supposed to be taking an opposite direction, which is promoting industrialization. Now, that means that industries are struggling to produce enough, or there is a lack of the existence of those industries that are very much focused on the manufacturing of goods into final products. What will now globalization do in that context, which comes in the form of a neoliberal market integration? You're just integrating your market to the whole global economy. That's what it is. You're global, you're integrating the whole structure of a smaller economy, for example, like Botswana, or it can be Mauritius, it can be the Kingdom of Eswatini. Now you're supposed to be integrating that into the whole global economy, exposing your infant industries into this very much bigger in international competition. I'm saying this because even if you look at the history of industrialization from the global north itself, you will see I already mentioned how there's been a lot of research that has been done by quite a number of scholars, but now most notably it was Robert Wade and Cheng, which are scholars that came to dispute a lot of claims that are coming from the global north, that the economies there, they developed because there was a free market, right? The market forces were just led to function and operate on their own. And then they were saying that in the instance of the late 70s and 1980s, they were saying, looking at the development and industrialization that had taken place in Asia, for example, with the Asian tigers, the most famous Asian tigers that mirrored in the market. And then we saw contributions like Robert Wade in the 1990s actually did an intensive research on that. Now, it is one of the widely cited books in this case, which was saying, no, actually, the Asian economies, the governments or the states across the states to protect the infant industries from the international competition, to then open up them to integrate those economies to the global competition when they are ready, and then those economies or those industries when they are ready to then that they can take on the international competition. Fast forward to the one by Cheng in the early 2000s, which was saying, while contrary to the perspective or the narrative that has been put out there by a lot of mainstream scholars and governments in some instances, when they are claiming that the states never played any substantial role in the development and industrialization of a lot of countries in Europe and even in North America. The book is saying, actually, there was a very substantial role that was played by the states in developing those economies. Measures that are adopted included protecting the industries when they are still smaller, so that they are not exposed to a global competition. Once they are then strong enough, then you can open up the borders, then you can liberalize your economies to everyone, so that you can be exposed to bigger markets and all of that. So again, I'm going back to the point that how you take or how globalization impacts you as an economy is very much dependent on your starting point. Where are you at that particular point in time? And then I was saying right now, in relation to globalization, economically, I don't see very much benefits that can come as a result of opening up right at the stage. So this is not a static perspective. Obviously, as the economies develop of the region, obviously expecting that at some point, then the economies are opening up to then receive these benefits that are coming with globalization and all of that, so that they can benefit. Obviously, at some point, or it's not to protection is permanent. It's not in a state of permanency. You are doing it for time being while you're growing your sector. Now, I'm saying the industrial sector or the manufacturing sector of the region is not very much strong enough. And it is very much going back as opposed to be going forward, right? Which means that we may want to still have within the region the protection of some of these industries at a regional level, as we are discussing a regional integration within Southern Africa. Member states assisting each other so that they are growing, they are developing, and then they are opening up their economies as the time progresses. I'll move on now to Dr. Rosero to then quickly take that question that was posed as the second one. But I also believe that Vanyoro's question, I believe it was posed to both of us, if I'm not mistaken. So if I may just hand over to you Dr. Rosero, and then you cover what you're going to cover. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Duma, and thanks, Dr. Manyoro, and congratulations for that milestone. We always follow the digital footprints and get the fantastic news. It fits there. I will respond by saying we also have migration experts. I reckon I have seen Dr. Akinola in the call. Maybe he may as well come in. But in the meantime, what I can say is that globalization, yes, I concur. Globalization offers opportunities. Why? Because for most of the time, the SADC region has remained heavily dependent on commodities. So SADC is very commodity dependent, the SADC states. And globalization offers those opportunities. But for a region or a state to really enjoy the dividends of globalization, there are certain things that they must do first. Otherwise, that kind of globalization becomes camouflaged imperial machinations by other means. You will never enjoy globalization when you are not industrialized. You will never enjoy globalization when you are not integrated at regional level. So if we are SADC 16 in one state, we are likely to enjoy globalization than small states, some weak states, some economically unstable, some undergoing a veritable meltdown. And as Dr. Duma deliberately and intentionally did by singling out Mauritius, South Africa, and Botswana, there was logic or reason to do that in terms of then nuancing his analysis on the issues to do with industrialization and integration, basing on the economies of these three states. So we are likely to harness more dividends if we get our things correct first at a local level. So yeah, there are opportunities there. Then you also talked about issues of migration diaspora, which might be an opportunity. But unlike the critical conscious diaspora of the estual era, the current diaspora, Brother Kudze, hardly fathom the idea of coming back. The connection that Africa has with its diaspora right now, for most of the time, it's on issues to do with remittances. There is really nothing that is taking place, and this is my opinion. It's not empirically based, but I have witnessed a trend where there is, for most of the time, issues to do with remittances where the diaspora always remit back home. And in some countries, like in Zimbabwe, diaspora remittances, they contribute a larger chunk to foreign currency earnings, which is quite positive. But you would expect a scenario of skills transfer, machinations, equipment, investments back home that would then trigger issues to do with development, industrialization, and integration, as opposed to just sending money back home, which may actually cultivate dependency and de-skilling and de-innovation, which is not what we aspire. So diaspora community in the current scheme of things is a double-edged sword. On one hand, we are receiving their monies, remittances, but on the other, we have not witnessed the most desired skills transfer, plowing back the skills back home, machinery equipment, or even relocation in mass to say, I was based in the diaspora for 10 years, I have relocated home, I want to invest home. That has not taken place. So it's up to us to actually come out with workable models to see how best we can tap from this opportunity that you made reference to. Then Samantha asked on how citizens can take a collective approach to integrate themselves. Yeah, the challenge with our citizenry, remember I made reference to us still being colonial subjects. So the problem with colonial subjects, we tend to other the other. Whenever you go across borders, you always feel and reminded of how foreign you are in that particular country. So it's very difficult for citizens at that level to take a collective approach. But back at a micro or a unitary level of a state, there are also divisions that are at tribal level, that are at discriminatory level, hailing from certain regions, hailing from certain totems, etc. So the tribe must die for the nation to be born. The nation must also die, the state must also die for a region to be born. And citizens have a role in realizing that they are the primary actors. They are at the same position with states, but that proactive role is kind of subtle right now because the crisis in Southern Africa is that there are certain citizens who always perceive them as better than the next. And we have this crisis, it didn't start now. People, they talk much about xenophobia in South Africa. I will tell you about xenophobia in Zimbabwe. We used to have Mozambicans coming from Mozambique fleeing the Renamo, Matsangaise war, and most of the time they were the ones who kept our rural places, heading cattle, etc. But there was this discrimination of calling them Masena, Mamosken, way back in the 1990s. So you look at the federal dynamics where there was a federal government of Rhodesia, Northern Rhodesia, and Nyasaland, which is Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Malawi, which led to mass movements of people. And Zimbabwe ended up having a significant chunk of people originally from Malawi. And these people, they suffer up to now a lot of segregation and discrimination, to the extent that the former president, late Robert Mugabe, even called them totemless people. So citizen collective approach, I have problems with that at the level where we are with regards to how we discriminate ourselves, the imperial and colonial poison that we have consumed, which is still determining our attitudes and shaping the way we think with regards to fellow brothers and sisters from other countries. Those will be my responses, Brother Dr. Duma.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosero. I believe that was helpful to the questions that were asked. Otherwise, if those who ask the questions, if they are not well answered, they can indicate so. Then maybe see if we can elaborate further on that. But we have a question here. Again, I believe now we are on the second round by Samantha, who is asking, yes, I mentioned when I was answering Dr. Vanoro's question that this thing is not static. As I was saying right now, that element of globalization within Southern Africa is also emphasized just now by Dr. Rosero, that if you're not industrialized, globalization can do very little for you. Instead, it can have the opposite effect of taking you back in a way. And I explained that, but for example, within as far as the economic aspect of that is concerned. So data is evolving. SADC as a region itself is evolving. Maybe it will be doing way much better. I don't think so they can do that within the next 2 years, but we're going to use that, just going to extrapolate that maybe and say in the next 8 to 10 years, if I may put it that way, and then we can see how the region is doing. And then maybe obviously a lot of things may have to be revised on how I put them there in the book. But that was just dealing with that period, that 30-year period, on how the region has fared during that period. So yes, I mean, it will definitely be revised, because I mean a lot of data was for that specific period that I've just mentioned, and then even now as we speak, some data may have already changed, which may, require some revisions and all of that. So, and then we have a question from Professor Zondi. Does the adoption of the SADC plan, which is the RISDEP Regional Integration Strategic Development Program, does the help in making SADC more developmental? If not, why is the intention and not materialized? Prof, the adoption does not help. It's the implementation that actually helps, because just adopting a mere adoption of a document, it doesn't matter how beautiful or how well intended the plan may be. It is not very much useful if it is not implemented and executed at the national capitals. If member states only adopt these plans at a more regional level and then do not integrate this into their own national development plans, it's a problem then in as far as the achievement of this regional to rather have those adopted and implemented at the national capitals by the member states that are concerned. And also with RISDEP, the goalpost just keeps shifting, right? We did have the initial one in 2003 that was adopted when member states said that we have this developmental regional integration and approach, but RISDEP as the driver, it is a blueprint for SADC's regional integration agenda. So that's the blueprint the member state follows in their quest to try and execute the regional integration agenda. But the goalpost just keeps shifting, because now, while in 2003, the initial one, the trade integration of the region was the top priority, the recent one that they adopted, which is between 2020 and 2030, it is different now. That one is trying to front load industrialization as the main priority for the region moving forward. So they also have, the point I'm making is that the priorities have to be very clear, and instead of jumping from one to another while the other one has not been achieved yet. Otherwise, this will create a lot of confusion, as it has created that amount of confusion with the implementation of the regional integration agenda within the region. As far as the customs unions are concerned, why the customs union in the region has not yet been in effect or been implemented. One of the main challenges is there. I believe that, but this is my own observation, is that I believe fallen into that market integration path that the region seems to have committed into slightly in the late 90s, early to mid 2000s. Now, all of a sudden, with the adoption of the Industrial Development Framework in 2012, now there seems to have been a slight refocusing on they're now trying to double down on trying to promote, industrialization in the region so that they can, in a way, promote sustainable development. While these are still active, though, because there's no clear suspension of that linear approach, which was moving from the free trade area, customs union, common market, and monetary union. So there was no clear suspension of those proceedings. But on the other hand, they're now saying, okay, now let's park the pursuit of trade integration at the space. Let's try now to front load industrialization, industrial development in the region. So it has been that clash of priorities, which I can then say that it has pushed the region where it finds itself right now, where it just seems very, it's like a spaghetti bubble. The priorities are just swimming all over each other, and it is in a way it's not helpful to the realization of the RISDEP agenda as the blueprint for the region's regional integration agenda. Yes, IPATC.
Thank you, Dr. Duma. I also have a question, if I may.
All right. Let's go ahead.
So my question is with regards to SADC Intertrade and your opinions on the prospects of AfTA in the region, because there have been reported low levels of growth and mixed trade performance of the countries in the SADC free trade area. So is it not fair to say that the success of this recently launched AfTA partly hinges on the performance of these existent free trade areas, like the one in SADC. That would be my contribution. And also, please note there's a question in the chats from Kosikon.
Thank you, Pumi, for that question. Looming leadership crisis in African countries, how has it contributed to SADC's low rate of regional integration and poverty alleviation? So thank you for that question, Kosikon. Maybe I should start with that one before I come to Mpumi's. Or maybe now I'm front-loading. Do you want to go first, Dr. Rosero?
It's fine. It's fine.
All right.
The looming leadership crisis, we addressed it when we were talking about issues of neo-patrimonial states. We are witnessing an emergence of neo-patrimonialism in Africa and in Southern Africa that we have not witnessed before, because you know, the crisis we have is that some of the leaders are pretty much compradors in power. They are petty bourgeois in power who perceive the state as an instrument of accumulation and instrument to make money. So there is no place for industrialization and regional integration with the kind of some political leaders that we have that are manifesting. Why? Because the region, states in the region have not been very permissive in terms of lucrativeness, in terms of opportunities. And for most of the time, politics is now only the escape route. It's the end itself, not the means to an end. So you now have career politicians, people who have never worked anywhere. They are opposition, they are in government, they are in the ruling party, etc. They are well-nourished, well-fed, but they never worked anywhere. So I don't think that crop of leadership would take seriously and urgency issues with regards to regional integration or driving regional industrialization. Then Prof. C made reference to customs union. Yeah, there is another political dimension to it in addition to what Dr. Duma said. Remember, Southern Africa was actually supposed to be a success story with regards to a customs union, because the Southern Africa Customs Union is the oldest customs union in the world, having started in 1910, and it is South Africa and the BLNS states, Botswana, Lesotho, Eswatini, and Namibia. So I don't know the logic behind trying to reinvent the wheel as opposed to building what is already in place in terms of its infrastructure, its structure, its purpose, because it has actually sustained and withstood the test of time. But the truth of the matter is that states, the SADC states have a subtle but very visible discomfort in South Africa, which automatically they perceive would emerge more dominant in that kind of a customs union, given its size of the economy, given its pace in terms of industrialization. So there are certain political leaders who resent that idea on that basis. This is not new. The subtle competition by some leaders with South Africa. We saw it when Nelson Mandela came out of jail. At a time, Mugabe's regional limelight was on cloud 9. So there was some tiff between Mugabe and Mandela in terms of regional leadership. That's the one that resulted in Zimbabwe, Angola, and Namibia in DRC. It was part of that kind of tiff. So I wouldn't know why the fact that we have a model already, SACU, in place, why can't we follow that one and fulfill a common customs union? I think those will be my submissions.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosero. It appears that we've now exhausted our time here. But maybe before I come to you, just for your parting shots, Dr. Rosella, just briefly answer Mpume's question on the REC's intra-regional trade and how does that benefit the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, let's remember that from the very get-go, what is happening right now is very much stipulated in the Abuja Treaty, the one that was trying to then, bring into effect the African Economic Community. That the regional economic communities like your SADCs, they are supposed to facilitate to make it a smooth transition for the achievement of the African Economic Community. So the African Continental Free Trade Area is very much part of that. It is also there in the Abuja Treaty. So if regional economic communities are ramping up, that means that they are doing their mandate exactly as it was stipulated by the Abuja Treaty. So that obviously will do benefit the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. In fact, it is to the benefit of the AfCFTA implementation and for it to be able to achieve its objectives if member states of the RECs are able to come together and trade, ramp up the intra-trade, which can then span across the continent. Now, whether or not the current state of the regional economic communities in the region is complementary to the AfCFTA, that is another question, a totally different story, because there are a lot of complications, there are a lot of coordination challenges that are across the RECs at the moment. That will make it very much more difficult to make the AfCFTA more effective, now, which is now contrary to what was stated in the Abuja Treaty as the main mandates of all of these RECs that are across the continent are in helping to then establish the African Economic Community. Coming back to you, Dr. Rosero, just the parting shot, and then we are wrapping up.
Thank you. My parting shots would be that 1.1 billion people in Africa make sense, and there will be dividends derived if those 1.1 billion people are assembled into the regions that they hail from, and regions move as one. So if we do that, that's when we will see the agency and the urgency of industrialization and integration. And we must also develop internal shock absorbers as Africa in general and Southern Africa in particular, that coloniality and colonial matrices of power will never sleep. We will have to wobble. We will not sit, listen.
Dr. Rosero?
To the sounds of our hair turning gray, to just blame issues of coloniality, but we must take stock of what we are doing for ourselves as citizens and as political leadership.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosero. Thank you so much, everyone, for being part of this discussion. And we hope it was fruitful. We hope you were engaged, and thank you so much for the contributions that were made. And thank you so much to our behind-the-scenes team at IPATC. Obviously, this will not have been very much successful without the assistance of Miss Siphumelele Duma and Ratizo Makombe. Thank you so much. Please stay on the lookout for other IPATC events that are coming up in the future. Thank you so much. Bye.